So in this segment, we're going to do something we do quite a bit of, and that is debate. But this time, not about politics. We're going to discuss music. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominees, they're out, and as usual, they're filled with controversy. Do Pat Benatar or the Doobie Brothers belong in? What about Judas Priest? Also, Rolling Stone has put out their list of the 100 best singers, and as you'd expect here, a whole lot of controversy, both with who's on it and the rankings. Where does Bob Dylan fall in this? Why did John Lennon come in way higher than Paul McCartney? And why isn't George Harrison even on the list? Well, Jimmy Fink, he joins us now. He's been broadcasting for 4 decades, including 15 years at the legendary WPLJ in New York City. Now, he's the afternoon drive time guy on the Peak 107.1 out of Westchester. Let's do the Hall of Fame first. Obviously, people forever have been talking about the politics associated with it. There's no perfect way to do this, but the criteria for, I guess it's 25 years from your first album until then, are you comfortable with how to decide who gets in and who doesn't?
Well, first, just a little disclaimer. I worked for Rolling Stone for a couple of years. I produced a nationally syndicated radio show for them. It's very arbitrary. I think it's political. There's a lot of people who are on the list of people who are in or have been nominated, and then there are so many people who are on the list of who are not in the Hall of Fame and who were never nominated. So, you know, I don't know what the exact process is. I know that, you know, there's a lot of record company executives on the board. There's Jan Wenner from Rolling Stone, who's one of the originators of the Hall of Fame itself, and so I think it's kind of arbitrary. You know, I can't tell you what the exact process is. I've never been part of it.
Well, we all get, in effect, everybody's opinion on this one matters. So to me, what's interesting is some of the nominees. Some had really short windows to their career. I mean, Notorious B.I.G. obviously ending so prematurely, and then others, their window was, let's say, in the 80s.
Yeah, well, when you talk about Notorious B.I.G., I mean, first of all, that whole name, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Right, that's
so what does that have to do with Notorious B.I.G. or Whitney Houston, for that matter, or a lot of people who are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? They probably should have a different name for it.
Honestly, I thought I was the old, guy yelling, "Get off my lawn" when I saw that, but it's not the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
But having said that, and looking at who are the people in there, Notorious B.I.G. was a force in the genre of music that he did, and I think most of the people who are nominated deserve to be in. I also think there are a ton of people who have never been nominated who deserve to be in. Probably more than these people.
What's your criteria? For some, it's people who really shaped the industry, or others here who have the longevity that people can touch, that albums, touch more than a single decade. Do you have any kind of threshold that you say, well, that's a non-starter for me?
Well, I think that if you just look at a band like Foreigner, for example, I went to a Foreigner concert. You forget now how many songs they had. I mean, you can go to a Foreigner concert and you'll know every single song, but maybe 3 or 4 of them are still played on, the popular radio stations or the classic rock stations. So I think it's probably the same thing with Pat Benatar, who's nominated this year. She was a very talented singer. I think she went to Juilliard, but also she's well connected with through her management and record company, and had a lot of really good strong hit records in the days when artists sold millions of records.
And you can relate, Andrew.
And the Doobie Brothers, the same thing, another nominee.
You look at Pat Benatar. How many girls in high school in our window here, went for the Pat Benatar? Just look at Fast Times at Ridgemont High. But we have a director who is a metal aficionado.
Yeah.
And for him, the idea that Judas Priest isn't in there, even I'll acknowledge, there was a trinity in there. You had Black Sabbath, you had them. I mean, they should be in.
Well,
right?
definitely they should be in. I mean, they are. If you had to list some of the 5 best metal bands ever, or the most successful ones, you'd have to put Judas Priest in there. I had the opportunity. One of the most thrilling experiences of my career was to introduce Judas Priest on stage at Madison Square Garden. I mean, that was just like wow.
Did he come rolling in
Turbo
on the motorcycle?
Turbo Lover tour. Oh man, it was just incredible. I mean, I've been on stage at Madison Square Garden a couple of times, but to be there and saying Judas Priest,
that's
that
great.
was wild. That was really wild.
You know, going back to the genre shift that you were talking about with Notorious B.I.G. and Whitney Houston, one thought came to mind. If this keeps going, I don't know how many more bands you can fit into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame without expanding the. Rock and roll is sort of dying in a lot of ways. I mean, it's not, you either get hard rock or heavy metal these days, or you get country as the pop outlet for two guitars, a bass, and drums. I'm just curious from your standpoint as we're talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Is rock and do you share my concern that rock and roll is dying, or
No.
it's changing?
I guess maybe you're not listening to The Peak too much. If you were, you'd know that there are a lot of really great new bands. And when I say new, I mean I could include in that group, you know, bands like the Decemberists or Death Cab for Cutie. They're not that new. They're maybe decades old at this point. But there are always new artists. Rock and roll is not dead or dying.
All right. Now, speaking of debates, and speaking of your old stomping grounds, Rolling Stone, they'll put out lists.
Yeah.
And you've, certainly presided over the greatest guitarists of all time, the greatest bands of all time. Now they put out the greatest singers of all time.
Yeah.
And just like the Hall of Fame, you want to talk covering just about every genre. At the top of the list, Aretha Franklin, okay? But then you go down the list here, and did it make any sense to you who got in there? Because Bob Dylan, being in the top 10, okay, had a voice, my God, nasal is being probably the nicest thing you could do, and yet he's way above so many others.
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm not a big fan of lists in and of themselves. If they had just put out a list without numbering them, that would be one thing. But to number them and to say that, you know, Aretha Franklin is better than, Gladys Knight or whatever, who's also on the list. You know, so I'm not a big fan of lists ranking people in order. Second of all, what is Rolling Stone living in the past? There's like half the people on this list are dead.
Right.
And I don't think any of them has had like a major hit in 20 years, or if maybe a couple of them have. And there are certainly, I don't know, it's just I'm not a big fan of ranking lists. Like, people always are saying to me, what's your favorite song? What's your favorite album? I just can't name one. I can't name one.
How about you? What jumped out at you on the list?
I got a few issues, and they're all bands or singers that I love.
Yeah.
Jeff Buckley included on the list. I love Grace, and I think he was, but he died after one album, and I don't see how you can put him on the list.
Right.
You mentioned Dylan, Springsteen, Cobain, and Lou Reed.
I mean, Cobain.
And I'll throw Bonnie Raitt onto that
You
list
don't think
also.
of them as a great vocalist,
Exactly.
if that's what the list is supposed to be. I mean,
But then if that's
Kurt
not what it's
Cobain-
supposed to be,
Kurt
why
Cobain-
would McCartney be number one?
well, why would John Lennon be
ahead
higher
of
than Paul
McCartney?
McCartney?
Right,
yeah, there's another
Yeah,
one.
but John did
and
have a
George
great
Harrison
voice.
not on the list at all.
That's true. That's true. George not on the list at all. So the list is kind of arbitrary, just like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I guess, is arbitrary.
And if you're going to go through those, like the Dylans and the Springsteens, I mentioned Jeff Buckley, and he sang Hallelujah. Leonard Cohen could theoretically be on the list, even though he did not have a particularly gifted singing voice. But again, if you're talking about the passion that you bring to it, I suppose.
Well, I think that the fact that Rolling Stone put out a list, you know, I guess ranking them, that's the part that doesn't make sense to me. The list is, in and of itself, you know, might be valid, but there are, going back to what you were talking about, rock and roll dying, there are a lot of great vocalists right now, new vocalists, people like Rachel Price from Lake Street Dive, Brittany Howard from Alabama Shakes. These girls have great voices. There's nobody on the list that's sort of current.
Well, I will promote, not that you're here for that, but especially in the day and age where everybody pre-selects what they want to listen to, and you tend to put if you ever want to broaden the horizons, turn on to the Peak, because you get a mix of some of the classic, you also get some of the new. I've got introduced to a whole bunch of bands here that I heard for the first time there, including some local acts as well. And again, that's 107.1 The Peak. Well, we've been flashing that list of their top 100 and also the Hall of Fame nominees. Be prepared and feel free to continue to debate. Jimmy, thank you so much.
Thank you for
I appreciate
having
the time.
me. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
And we'll be right back to wrap things up.